9. Cold War submarine graveyard. Russia's Kola Peninsula is home to a Soviet-era submarine graveyard that was largely forgotten about until recent years. The vessels lay out of sight in a restricted part of Nezamednaya Cove near the Finnish border. The site is connected to a secretive naval base that's still active today. The subs were left there in the 1970s. At the time, Soviet shipyards were struggling to keep up with the demand for warships. Properly disposing of submarines simply wasn't a priority. Some of the decommissioned subs were reportedly used for target practice and sunk, while others were simply left to rust. But there are several reasons why it's a bad idea to simply dump a submarine or ship into the water and allow nature to take its course. Over the years, oil and rust polluted the waters at Nezamednaya Cove, and it took authorities a while to realize they had to act before it got any worse. They burned at least one submarine. The others were pulled from the water, dismantled, and recycled for their parts. Some of the subs were in good enough condition to be used as training vessels, and one ended up on display in a museum. Satellite imagery showed that as of 2007, there were at least 7 submarines still sitting in the water, and they were visibly beyond salvaging. 8. Iraqi Air Force jets. While searching for weapons of mass destruction in 2003 at Al Takadum airfield west of Baghdad, US military search teams found dozens of Iraqi force fighter jets buried in the sand. The shocking discovery was made when one of the search team members spotted the tail fin of a Cold War-era fighter jet sticking out of the sand. It was clear that the planes were fully intact when they were buried, but no measures had been taken to protect them from their surroundings. Several other abandoned aircraft were found hidden beneath trees and draped with camouflage sheets. To further conceal the jets, the Iraqi military had scattered the fields with planes that had been destroyed in previous wars, making it difficult for enemy bombers to choose targets that were worth striking. Before the Iraq War, intelligence analysts had estimated that the country's military had around 300 combat aircraft left over from the 1991 Kuwait War. But the Iraqi Air Force was conspicuously absent amid the onset of the conflict that began in 2003. This led US military officials to believe that the fighter jets were not being used because they were deemed inadequate against British and American air power. While the hidden planes were a lot less dangerous than the weapons of mass destruction that the search teams were looking for, they still represented weapons that Iraq was trying to hide. This left some American politicians and government officials extremely concerned about what else the country may have up its sleeve. 7. Space Shuttle External Fuel Tank. From 1977 to 1980, NASA used a full-scale model of an external fuel tank for its Space Shuttle program tests. After that, the 154-foot-long, 47-meter object was put on display in Mississippi, and then found a new home at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. It remained there until 2013, when NASA started getting rid of old equipment from the Space Shuttle program, which had been discontinued in 2011. The agency auctioned off the external fuel tank model, but the winning bidder from California changed their mind when they realized how truly massive it was and that it would be incredibly difficult to move it across the country. So the fuel tank went to the next highest bidder, the Wings of Dreams Aviation Museum in Keystone Heights, Florida. Volunteers generously lugged the gargantuan hunk of metal towards its destination using cranes, a barge, and 2 tugboats. They left it on the docks in Green Cove Springs, with plans to move it to the museum a few months later, but the journey ended there. It would be impossible to transport the fuel tank on land without closing 2 state highways and taking down street signs and cables along the way. In other words, completing this final leg of the journey would be a logistical nightmare, and it would also be incredibly expensive. The museum didn't have a sponsor to carry out this part of the mission, and the fuel tank continues to sit at the dock in Green Cove Springs. There's no clear word on if or when it'll finally be moved. 6. MV Panagiotis. The breathtakingly beautiful Greek island of Zakynthos is home to a crescent-shaped beach called Navagio Beach. It's only accessible by boat, but it's nevertheless famous for its pristine white sand and for a mysterious wrecked freighter that sits on its shoreline. The ship, known as the MV Panagiotis, ran aground during the 1980s. Rumor has it that it operated as a smuggling ship, carrying illegal cigarettes, alcohol, and other contraband, as well as humans across international borders without the proper permits. According to local legend, the Greek Navy cornered the vessel into the cove where it sits today. But the true story behind the wreck is far less exciting than that. Captain Charalambos Kompothekeras Kodsoros claimed that his ship wasn't carrying anything illegal, and that it washed ashore due to mechanical problems and poor weather. Thieves were quick to appear and loot the ship's cargo. The captain said that he pursued legal action against the looters and then returned to the beach to retrieve the ship. But he was so awed by the sight of the ship against the scenic backdrop of vibrant blue waters and high cliffs that he decided to leave it where it was. And it wasn't a bad decision. Thanks to the wreck, Navaggio became Greece's most iconic beach and one of its top tourist attractions. Unfortunately, several visitors were harmed in a landslide in 2018, forcing the Greek Tourism Ministry to close the beach for safety reasons. Last year, a committee was appointed to determine the future of Navaggio Beach, including the best ways to protect it and whether to reopen it to the public. At last update, they were hoping to restore the wreck and make the site safe for visitors by summer, and to reopen it in a way that locals can benefit from the tourism revenue. Would you like to visit this beach? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. 5. Electric Car Cemetery. Last year, a photograph claiming to show an electric car graveyard in France went viral on social media. It was accompanied by a caption stating that electric cars get tossed in lots and left to rot because replacing their batteries is more expensive than replacing the cars themselves. The post also claimed that the battery's chemicals saturate the ground, defeating the environmentally friendly reasons that inspired the development of electric cars in the first place. Reuters fact-checked the post and found that the cars were not taken off the road because their batteries were dead. They were parked in the field when a contract between a local company and the government expired. The retired fleet was used as part of a car-sharing program called Autolib. Members could use the cars whenever they needed. As convenient as that sounds, the program struggled with booking and parking issues, as well as competition from Uber and other ride-sharing companies. When the contract ended, the company moved its 4,000 cars out of Paris and into the field south of the city. Contrary to the claims circulating on social media, it's unlikely that they'll sit there forever, languishing in a perpetual state of neglect. They've been sold to 2 different companies, including one that specializes in selling cars. Paul Alzerate, who heads one of the companies called Atis Production, told Reuters that the cars are stored properly and that they're not a pollution risk because their batteries have been removed. But the rising popularity of electric cars does pose potential problems when it comes to battery disposal and recycling. Each vehicle contains a half-ton lithium-ion battery, and the question of what to do with them once they're spent remains unanswered. There are environmental consequences to not recycling lithium-ion batteries, but no potential solutions have been developed. 4. PRINZ EUGEN. The PRINZ EUGEN was a Nazi naval warship that entered service at the beginning of World War II. In 1946, US forces seized it as a war prize and relocated it to the waters off Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. The American military nuked the ship twice, along with dozens of other vessels, in a series of tests codenamed Operation Crossroads. PRINZ EUGEN was only lightly damaged, but the experiment left it dangerously radioactive. After several failed decontamination attempts, the Navy towed it to Kwajalein Atoll and awaited further instructions on what to do with it. In the meantime, the contaminated ship began to take on water. 6 months later, it capsized, sank, and landed upside down on the seafloor while being towed for repairs. The vessel is still visible today in the shallow waters of Enubuj Island, where its propellers can be seen protruding above the waves. Experts began to warn as far back as 1974 that PRINZ EUGEN would leak oil into the South Pacific if it wasn't removed within 30 years. Starting in 2018, the US Army, Navy, and the Micronesian government worked together to pump all the oil out of the ship's fuel tanks. By then, the environment and the local population had already suffered plenty from the damaging radioactivity left behind by the nuclear tests. Removing the oil was part of a disturbingly overdue effort to protect both wildlife and humans from the lasting impact of American military's past activities. 3. Bartini-Beriev, VVA-14. During the Cold War, the United States and Russia competed for military superiority by engaging in a frenzied arms race. Each country stockpiled as many weapons as possible as a way to prove that they were bigger and better than the other, and in case actual physical warfare broke out. One of the USSR's main priorities was to prepare for possible deep-sea missile strikes. Throughout the 1970s, the Soviet Navy worked to combat this perceived threat by developing the Bartini-Beriev VVA-14 plane. The amphibious aircraft was tasked with defending the Soviet border by detecting American submarines. Named after Italian designer Robert Bartini, the strange-looking plane was perched on pontoons. It was manned by a 3-person crew and was capable of vertical takeoff, as well as taking off and landing in the water. The Bartini-Beriev VVA-14 worked by skimming along the water as it patrolled for enemy vessels. Only 2 prototypes were built before the project was ultimately scrapped, with one logging over 103 flight hours and 107 flights. Just one of the vehicles survives today, but it's not operational. It can be seen near the Russian Air Force Museum outside Moscow. A group of aviation enthusiasts campaigned for its revival in 2013, but their efforts were unsuccessful. 2. MV Lyubov Orlova. Built in Yugoslavia in 1976, the MV Lyubov Orlova was an Antarctic cruise ship that remained in service until 2010. After that, she was decommissioned and fell into disrepair as she sat docked for 2 years in the Canadian province of Newfoundland. A shipping company bought the vessel in 2012 with plans to dismantle and scrap it. But it broke free from its towline and the tugboat pulling it in early 2013, while en route to a shipbreaking facility in the Dominican Republic. Crew members tried to reattach the ship, but they were no match against the 10-foot, 3-meter waves and the 22-mile-per-hour, 35-kilometers-per-hour winds. The Lyubov Orlova eventually drifted back into the waters off eastern Canada, prompting the government to task an offshore vessel with regaining control of it. After towing the vessel back into international waters, the crew released it into the open ocean. In other words, it was no longer their problem in the eyes of Canadian authorities. Eyewitnesses later reported seeing the ship off Ireland and Iceland. In March 2013, its emergency position indicating radio beacon was detected off the coast of Kerry, Ireland. This type of signal is only transmitted when the device comes into contact with water, indicating that the Lyubov Orlova probably sank somewhere in the Atlantic. 1. ROHR AEROTRAIN. At the Pueblo Railway Museum in Colorado, there's a paradoxically vintage yet futuristic-looking vehicle known as the AEROTRAIN. Its test tracks sit thousands of miles away in the French countryside, where they look conspicuously out of place, to say the least. There's one platform on each end, as well as a middle station. A small portion of the tracks were destroyed, but the rest of the apparatus remains in place. But what's the story behind these pieces? Developed by French engineer Jean Bertin, the AEROTRAIN was an experimental tracked air cushion vehicle, TACV. As one of the earliest hover trains, it traveled over a reinforced concrete monorail track on an air cushion created by powerful compressors. It was designed to eliminate the rolling resistance of wheeled vehicles and could travel at unprecedented speeds without the expensive complications that came along with the similarly designed Maglev's electromagnetic track. The US-based company, ROHR Industries, licensed Bertin's technology in 1969. In a bid to defeat its competitors for a high-speed ground transportation contract with the US Department of Transportation, the company's engineers designed and built a fully operational $10 million electric prototype. Designed to carry 60 passengers, the 94-foot, 29-meter vehicle could easily travel at speeds of at least 150 miles per hour, 241 kilometers per hour. A second prototype outperformed the first, reaching a record speed of 262 miles per hour, 422 kilometers per hour. But government funding for the project ran out, and despite its success, the ROHR prototype was never commercialized. If Bertin's vision had been realized, the train would have undoubtedly been a state-of-the-art development that would have revolutionized rail travel. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.